Whether we are there or not, ITSP Magazine still gets the best stories. Plenty of conferences and events spark our curiosity and allow us to start conversations with some of the world's brightest minds. In person or virtually, Sean Martin and Marco Ciappelli go on location and sit down with them at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Together, we discover what the synergy of these three elements means for the future of humanity. High Trust continues to champion programs that safeguard sensitive information and manage information risk for global organizations across industries and throughout the third-party supply chain, collaborating with public and private sector experts in privacy, information security, and risk management to identify emerging threats and help organizations ensure they take the most effective steps to avoid them. Learn more at hightrustalliance.net.
Marco.
Sean, vroom vroom.
You beat me to it. It's a rare occasion. We use that a lot because these are our chats on the road episodes, and that's kind of a one of the signatures. I guess I don't know if we have any real signature, but none more important or relevant than for this conference where we're talking about.
Like I had to say it.
I know.
To do
you made that connection straight out.
Yep, absolutely.
So look at that. So we're obviously as the chats on the road. We're looking at a couple conferences, AutoSens and InCabin in Europe, where of course I don't know exactly. That's why we have guests to help us understand what's going on. But it's about the automotive industry and the technology that is a car these days, a computer on wheels, and as we move to autonomous vehicles in all shapes and sizes and forms, that technology only grows in scale and in importance. And so a couple conferences, it seems, tackling this space to help bring people together and drive things forward in a positive way. So I'm thrilled to have Sara Sargent and Rob Stead on. Thank you both for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Yay,
pleasure to be here.
Yes.
This is going to be fun. I can see a journey touching on a lot of different topics. Before we get into the different events and what's going on at each, maybe a few words about your role in this space. And Sara, we'll start with you.
Sure. So my background is in electrical engineering and working for companies in different parts of automotive tech. And so my role at SenseMedia is that I do two things. I'm our automotive technology specialist. So I just sort of keep an eye and make sure that we're publishing things and working with companies that have technical integrity. And then the other part of my role is that I lead on our InCabin event. Rob will go into the history of how it launched, but when we decided to launch InCabin, I joined the team to be the champion for InCabin.
Nice. Rob.
Cool. And I'm the managing director and founder of SenseMedia. So I've been running B2B technical conferences for 20 odd years by now. I spent 10 years with a company in the UK before deciding that I really wanted to focus on a specific market. And one of my frustrations with my old company was we were spread really thin in a lot of different market areas. And I felt like the space of automotive imaging was a really strong growth area at the time, but I'd got to know people in that community and I felt like they deserved an event that was really dedicated to their needs. And so I decided to leave and set up SenseMedia, and that's when we launched AutoSens, and that was back in 2015. The company was set up and we ran our first conference in 2016. I kind of oversee things. I dip in here and there, build relationships with people in the ecosystem, and then have the pleasure of opening and closing the conferences on site as well.
Very nice. So let's start with this. I heard about car driving themselves for as long as not that I can remember, because I grew up with the Flintstones, so the car actually had the little, you have to drive it with your feet, but long enough to see that there has been a very, very big evolution into what happened in the past, let's say 15 years or so. So you kind of started already a while back, and I want to start with that. I mean, how is different now from when you had the idea, Rob, to tackle this particular area of the automotive?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think our company lifetime, the lifetime of these events, a lot's happened actually. So we're coming up to 10 years that we've been running AutoSens and InCabin for 3 years. But back in 2016, there was a huge hype around self-driving cars, and maybe not for the first time, but certainly probably the biggest amount of hype that we've seen in history. We weren't the only conference back then. There were lots and lots of conferences from all sorts of organizations, and there were many marketing promises, many promises made by the automakers and different projects that we'd all be riding around in robo-taxis by 2021. And I think the interesting thing for me was that we built our event through working with the engineers who were developing the actual solutions to these problems, and who were designing the new sensors, designing the new processing chips, they're designing the algorithms, they're designing how the AI works. And when we talked to them, they were very clear, look, this isn't going to happen by 2021. These are very, very difficult problems to solve. So one of the founding ideas that we had was that we wanted our events to kind of cut through all that hype and not pretend this was going to happen quickly, and for our events to be a place for the engineers who are really working on these problems to come and meet and help to progress things. So even though the hype was there, I think we were clear that this wasn't going to happen so quickly. But then over the last few years, we've seen the typical Gartner hype curve thing happen. So peak of expectations, the trough of disillusionment, when everybody realizes, my word, this is really, really difficult. Most of those promises didn't come true. But I think there has been a lot of technical advancements, and where you'll see those is not necessarily within self-driving cars being on every street, but those advancements have helped us to build better ADAS safety systems in cars, and those do bring benefits. They do make the road safer, and they do help to save lives across the world. And then one of the things that's come out more recently is a real focus on sensing inside the cabin. And that's kind of where our InCabin conference came from. So, a bit more on that in due course. But yeah, the bottom line is self-driving cars are really, really difficult. It's the classic, the first 97% of the problem is relatively easy to solve, but that last 3%, those edge cases, the unexpected things that can happen on the road, it's really, really tough. And then you layer on top of that the regulatory approvals, the commercial side. I mean, the cost, this is incredibly expensive as well. It's really hard, if not impossible, for any individual company to do this by themselves. There are a couple out there, the Waymos, and but not every company has the resources that Google has. So it's really difficult to do, and it requires a lot of collaborations, and the collaborations are incredibly complex. So yeah, it's a tough ask. That's why things are moving more slowly than the promises made, a few years ago. But I think when we look at it, there are advances being made on the fundamental technologies all the time, and I think they can still bring benefits for the public and for drivers.
So I want to go to Sara for this kind of a continuation of what you're talking about there, because I think what's the current state? Because my sense, being a layperson in this space, is that everything has a sensor now, right? I don't know if there's anything missing a sensor. So now it becomes we can then generate data from these sensors. And now what are the use cases, right? And which ones do we invest in? Which one pushes the envelope too far? Which one needs regulations? Are companies competing, or are they collaborating to pull scenarios together that solve specific problems? So kind of give us an overview of the state of the sensing, and maybe you can transition to some of the in-cabin stuff, which might frighten me a little.
Give us a sense. Is that what you're going?
Give us a sense of the sensors.
Sensational. So the current state of things is is that it is fairly regional. So things are different in the US than they are in Europe than they are in Asia. So that's important to know. And I'm in the US, so I definitely have a more US perspective. I think that consumers are starting to understand the ADAS systems that are in their vehicles now, that have been for a very long time. And consumers are also starting to be aware that increasing levels of automation are coming. The most advanced consumer vehicle that are on the roadways would be an L3 vehicle. And what that means is that the driver is allowed to take their eyes off of the roadway and can do other activities in the car. And that will be with really specific, what we call operational design domains. So really specific conditions. So it would be only on certain types of roadways, only at certain speeds, only under certain weather conditions, that kind of a thing. But those are on the roadway.
Is that all sensed, or is that left to the user to determine?
That is all sensed. And so this is sort of a hot topic of contention of whether this is okay and safe or not, because the question is, if there is a situation where the driver does need to take over, what should that time be? And I think generally that's around 10 seconds, that the user, from the time when the system tells the user to take over to the time when the user actually needs to be able to take over. And so there's a lot of questions about, well, what is the driver doing in that downtime that can be put down and dealt with in 10 seconds? And what types of incidents do we have 10 seconds to react to? So that's sort of I think the more controversial thing with respect to consumer vehicles on the road right now. And I know those are legal only in a few states. I know Nevada is one of them. And then they're also legal for driving in certain parts of Germany. And from there, it's either you're going into the robo-taxi world, which are the Waymos of the world, where they are fully stacked out with sensors all over the vehicle so that they can perform L4 driving, which means no driver in the driver's seat. The L4, I think, is what people are really excited about. It's also absolutely outrageously expensive. So those will have the best sensing technologies on them, and much more sensing technology than any consumer vehicle will ever have. On the consumer vehicle side, what's much more common right now is level 2 vehicles, or some people are saying level 2 plus, level 2 plus plus. How many pluses can we put on it? But level 2 vehicles are probably what most people are used to. It will help you know when you're leaving the lane. It might nudge you back into your lane. It's much more about interacting with you as the user to make sure that the driving task is happening safely, rather than sort of taking over the responsibility for you. So that's a big difference.
Yeah, it's like an added layer of safety on top of the driver, rather than an autopilot kind of function. There's another thing. I was just at a different conference on Monday and Tuesday this week, and heard some of the latest stuff coming from the trucking side as well. Mm-hmm. So there's some interesting stuff going on there. Daimler and Volvo are the two kind of leading companies with some of their industry partners. And of course, the difference there is that these are commercial vehicles. The cost of the vehicles is much more significant anyway in the first place. So you can afford to add loads of extra sensors on and lots of kind of processing hardware. And it's not so cost prohibitive as doing that on a consumer vehicle. But they're really starting to roll these out. And there's a bunch of advantages there. In terms of the amount of time that the vehicles can be operating, ability to respond safely. I mean, there's I think something like 6,000 deaths in the US caused each year by truck drivers who are either asleep at the wheel or by mistakes by drivers. It's a tough job, and it's a difficult task for a human to do, to be awake and concentrating for such a long time. So having this technology in the trucking space can be really beneficial. But again, that comes with its own special considerations. The autonomy system can't necessarily do that kind of last mile in the city. It's more about taking over on the freeway. But yeah, I think trucking, because there's that ability to invest more in the vehicles, and there's the commercial incentives for the operators to have trucks that can operate, year round and more safely. There's been really, really good advances on the trucking side as well.
All right, so this put me a little bit on the question of, I look at things from a societal perspective. So cars definitely are part of our society and transportation and all of that. And I'm connecting with all this different level. And then you brought in the tracking companies and business. And I'm thinking, like, do we all need an L4, or for certain use of a car, of a vehicle, a really good L2 will be just fine, right? So do we need to get all the way out there or nowhere, or we can just enjoy all the extra safety that we're getting in the car? So that's kind of my question.
Go, Sarah.
I don't think in our lifetime, this is such a bold claim, but I don't think in our lifetime we'll ever own L4 vehicles. I think those will always be owned by fleet operators, where one company is sort of the responsible entity for all of the technology on the roadway with this sort of model, and then will order them as robo-taxis, because they'll be too expensive for us to ever own. So then, yes, I think L2 is what people are expecting. And I think there's probably going to be a lot of pushback. And I think it's too much of a gray area with L3 vehicles yet to be able to predict whether we will have mass adoption of L3 or not. I think we just need to see how regulators react, and then also how consumers behave. It was the similar thing when Tesla started becoming popular in the US with autopilot back in the 2019 time. Consumers started seeing how excellent the technology was performing, and so they, without being allowed to, right, breaking the rules, disengaged from driving. And that's where sort of in-cabin comes in, is we now put these cameras in the car to make sure you're focused on driving. But I think that it's too gray of an area to say for sure we'll ever jump into L3s being mass adopted. I think consumers should plan on having L2s for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So Rob, maybe this is for you, because Sarah's talking about in-cabin. Maybe we'll get a little deeper dive into that here in a second. But I want to stay big picture, because there's stuff inside the car, presumably looking at the people. Then there's stuff in the car, looking at the car itself, the technology that makes the car go and stop. And then there's other stuff. There's GPS. I don't know, do we have to do things to the road technology-wise? Do we have to change the signs and the lighting? Do you look at that bigger picture as well as part of the conferences you put on?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I mean, we've been talking for 10, 15 minutes, and already we've covered many of the reasons why this is such a complex conversation. Our modes of transport are very varied to begin with. Yes, within the vehicle, we can integrate sensors that can allow the vehicle to drive by itself. We can enhance that with things like mapping and location, but that requires the infrastructure to be modified, which is additional expense. So it's all about, I think for me, it's all about redundancy. So if we think about the vehicle by itself to start off with, in any kind of advanced safety system, you will have multiple modes of sensors. So cameras are used primarily. Radar has been used for a long time for adaptive cruise control and those kind of things. On the more advanced vehicles, LiDARs are used at the moment. And then obviously we have ultrasonic sensors for the parking assist, for those kind of short range things. The reason why we have those different sensor modalities is because they're all good at different things. Radar is very good at picking up objects and judging distances, but it's not very high resolution. Cameras are very good at seeing detail and seeing in color, but you can't really do distance measurements very well with them, and they're not good in the dark or in the fog or in the rain. LiDAR kind of sits in this middle ground where it's higher resolution, you can pick up objects, and you can kind of build a fairly good picture, and it works through some obstacles like fog and things like that. But it's very expensive at the moment, and there have been a lot of advances in that technology, moving to solid state technologies, but it's still expensive, and so you only see it integrated on consumer vehicles in some really high-end vehicles, and then on these expensive robotaxi models. But the reason for all of that is to build this redundancy. So if one sensor is not working so well, you have one or two other sensor clusters that you can rely on. And for me, building in the mapping and all of the infrastructure intelligence, the V2X, vehicle to infrastructure technologies, can help add extra layers onto that safety. But I don't think that's feasible to have worldwide, right? In major cities, then that can be helpful. There's also other ways that it can help transportation, managing traffic flow and all sorts of things like that beyond safety as well. So I think in cities we will see that, but outside of urban areas, then whatever the domain is, then I think we're going to see slightly different solutions. And so we're still figuring that out along the way. But I see that there will be different solutions in different geographies, in different environments, and then each of those solutions will have a different type of sensor cluster that is enabling it to do the job it needs to do in that specific situation.
I've been in a Waymo in San Francisco, so clearly they allow an L4, but I don't know if they allow an L3 in the city or not.
What did you think of the Waymo?
It was pretty cool, I have to say.
Good.
Yeah, and just not just the driving itself. I think I saw some of the LiDAR stuff where you could see people crossing the street and little images of cars and things like that you wouldn't necessarily even know or think about with your own eye, but you can see it on a screen and realize that the car's looking at some of that stuff. Just the end-to-end experience of course, it has to authenticate somebody as well. So there's that whole added piece. And at the end of the ride, it had to wait for a safe spot to pull over, just like a human would. So there's a lot of intelligence just beyond what am I seeing and is it safe to move now or not. So it was pretty cool. And the Jaguar is nice too. Nice ride. But I guess I want to go to the conference now, because I want to understand. Describe a little bit, Rob, why you pulled this together. I want to understand who attends, or is it the builders of the stuff? Do you get regulators? Do you get manufacturers of vehicles, not just the technology inside them? Who comes? What do they get out of the whole experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, our motto is by engineers for engineers. So that's where we set out from in the beginning. The stakeholders in the industry that I was in touch with before AutoSens existed were all senior engineers, working to solve the problems that were going to go into ADAS, into series vehicles in a kind of 5-year type of time frame, and they felt there was a need for a community, to build a community of like-minded people from up and down the supply chain, and to come together, several times a year and online in between, to be able to talk about these challenges. Because again, they were the ones stuck in the middle between understanding that we're moving inevitably towards higher levels of autonomy, the pressures from the businesses to make that happen as quickly as possible, but the pressure from the regulators to make sure it's safe. And again, we're not talking about developing anti-lock brakes here or seatbelts. These are incredibly complicated systems involving multiple stakeholders up and down the supply chain. So only by bringing all of those people together to talk and to collaborate and to be open and to talk about the science and the technology can we really have any hope of achieving that. So that's what we set out to do, was to build a community that would bringing all those stakeholders together. So we have engineers from the OEMs, from the tier one companies. We have a whole range of sensor manufacturers and sensor design companies. We have the people from the compute side, so building the processing chips, writing the software, designing the AI. We have testing and simulation and validation services and people involved in that side. We have regulators come. We have everybody really, but it's really focused on the engineering side. The way we structure the conferences is that we kind of top and tail the agenda with a plenary, and the plenary is some big picture thinking, looking about what's going on in the supply chain, looking about upcoming NCAP regulations, for example, things like that provide the context. But then we split into multiple technical tracks, and we have very technical presentations and panel discussions talking about how we can advance this technology. In my mind, we kind of sit between, but we're a big conference as well. So in Barcelona, in a couple of weeks, we're going to have over 1,000 people. We've got the co-location. So we've got AutoSens and InCabin co-located. So it's kind of two separate conferences with two separate but very related communities. And then we bring those together on site in Barcelona, and everybody that comes can attend the whole thing. They can chop and change between the conference tracks, and the exhibition is all in one space together. But by having two separate communities, we can really focus on the ADAS and the external sensing, which is AutoSens, and the internal sensing, not just for safety, but also for comfort and convenience, which is in cabin. But yeah, very much engineers, and our whole ethos is coming together. Take off the boxing gloves. This is not about competing. This is about collaborating. And we found that has really resonated, and that's what's helped us to grow over the last 9 years. Maybe Sara can tell you a bit more about InCabin, which spun out of AutoSens in the last few years.
Let's do that, but I want to introduce this part, because I think from a user perspective, when you think about the outside of the car, the safety, the driving, there is like, cool, it's just driving itself, it's making me safe. Then I'm thinking like there is a bunch of camera looking at me. I think there was already some Mozilla research telling how it could bring some uncomfortable situation of what's going on in the car, talk about privacy, talk about gender, talking about whatever is going to go in the car. It's kind of like your car, it's your space, at least, until we just rent a car when we need it, or the Waymos show up. So the perspective, I think, from a user point of view, to have the inside in cabin, it's a different story. So why do we need in cabin sensors? And I think that's a good way to start talk about this. Super great way to start.
So I'll say, for me, the big thing was when the regulations for child presence detection came through. And in the US, the past few years data, 40 children die every year in the US from being left in a car, which is absurd and totally avoidable. And regulators think so too. So they said, hey, guess what? If you're an automaker, you have to be able to detect whether a child has been left alone in a vehicle. And that's, from my perspective, what has kicked off the huge, then now very busy industry of interior sensing, very much about safety. Some of the other safety aspects of interior sensing are also things like your safe airbag deployment. So it can look at where you physically are in the vehicle, and it can adjust the timing of the airbag deployment, or even which airbags deploy based on your body pose, they call it. And there are other much more intricate, complex systems that are looking at your facial and body, your facial expression and body pose, that can give you sort of medical emergency information. So Sara is having a stroke, and if I'm having a stroke behind the wheel, and we know that, we could potentially have the car pull over safely to the side of the road and alert emergency services. Taking that a step further, there are certain different biomedical signals that can be picked up as one thing or another. And so, for instance, if the car senses I'm having this biomedical signal, it might diagnose it as one thing. When the emergency services get there, if they think I've been diagnosed as having a stroke or whatever it might be, they can then give me an injection that would save me. But if it's misdiagnosed me, they could give me an injection to save me that would then cause harm. And so if our car knows all of these biomedical habits, or sort of has this biomedical data that it's collected about us because we're in it every day for an hour a day, where we're not in our doctor's office or in front of our doctor for an hour a day every day, it knows what's normal for us that nobody else knows. And so that's another avenue that companies are really interested in, as it's like a personal doctor almost. That's taking it too far, but it's going to be picking up on medical habits and noticing changes, biomedical changes that could be used to help you, or go to your doctor, tell you you are showing signs of Parkinson's, go to your doctor and get diagnosed. So there's kind of a broad array, and it's sort of minimal little steps that can happen now, all the way up to like crazy ideas of what could happen in the future. So those are some. Do you find those scary or okay?
Well, I could have a series of 10 podcasts just to talk about what you just said.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it involves privacy, it involves decision, involves democratization, because is it going to be applied in a very expensive high-end car so that you have the doctor in the car, or can you apply on a cheap car that is more of a popular car, and so on. But definitely amazing stuff. And then I'm thinking, of course, the one that can detect if you're drunk is not going to start the engine. I think that's a pretty cool thing, right? I mean, definitely maybe more immediate than being your doctor, but who knows? Maybe my computer can be my doctor, considering I spend more time in front of a computer than a car.
As well, yeah.
So a lot of conversations. And any highlight in terms of keynotes or speakers that you're going to have that you want to kind of highlight right now?
Pick your favorite child. That's what he's asking.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, so I mean, for me, one thing I was just going to add to the last piece of the conversation is that, you know, the people developing the technology take all of these issues around privacy and security really, really seriously. So it's always top of the agenda, and you know, the solution to those problems are technical solutions. So how can you anonymize the data? How can you extract the useful information whilst making sure that everybody's privacy is protected? That is a technical problem. It's a technical problem at the end of the day, and you have to advance the technology to be able to do that. So it's always a common theme in our events as well. For me, I'm really looking forward to a couple of things in a couple of keynotes. So we have our first Chinese conference coming up in November this year, which is very exciting. We'd originally planned that for 2020, in November 2020, and we all know what happened to conferences during that time. So we're really, really happy to be revisiting that. And one of our keynotes in Barcelona in a couple of weeks is actually from China. So he's the head of the Volkswagen Technical Research Center near Shanghai, and he's going to be talking about what's going on in the market in China, which is very interesting and quite different to what's going on throughout Europe and the States. So delighted to have him along. And a good friend of mine, Professor Albert Terwison, he recently retired, but he was a professor at Technical University of Delft in the Netherlands for quite a few years, and he does a lot of training courses. He's been doing some testing with an unidentified sensor from the automotive space and has uncovered some performance limitations and challenges with that, which he's going to share with the whole group. So you can see we've kind of got some different levels of conversation going on there throughout the conference, whether that's looking at what's going on in a different market from the vehicle level right down to the sensor design and performance. So yeah, those are the bits I'm looking forward to. How about you, Sarah?
I'm very excited we have technical tutorials at our events, which are sort of 2 to 3 hour long workshop sessions. And this year for InCabin, we have someone who's from an OEM background in their past that is going to be doing a session on HMI design. And obviously how we interact with our cockpit is becoming more and more important the more features that we're adding in. So I think that's something that's really important for engineers who are designing the systems, not just the cockpits themselves, but the systems that are part of the cockpits. I think it's really important for those engineers to have the HMI design in mind as well when they're designing the technology that's in there. So I'm very excited for that session. And then we have another session that's on the stage, a presentation with a company called Anyverse, who's a simulation company. And they're presenting alongside Google on something that they've been working on, sort of about how we get to the right confidence level with the simulations that we're using for validating the technology. So those would be my two favorites.
Nice
Very
one.
Cool.
Nice one. Well, the conference is side by side, 8th through 10th of October in Barcelona. And yeah, I mean, so many topics. I mean, obviously we could talk for hours here. You have days of conversations, technical leading up to system, leading up to use cases, and why we loved it and why I was glad to have you both on the show and to have this chat, and hopefully we'll do more next year or throughout the year with you covering this topic.
By more, you mean we're going to go.
Exactly.
You should. It's such a good time. And we have the best networking events too.
Ooh, all right.
We have Oktoberfest this year. It's very cool.
Yeah. Nice one. Yeah, so I think, just the idea that you bring all this together, it's a topic that sits squarely at where we care most at ITSP Magazine, which is the intersection of technology, society, and cybersecurity. So enabling and empowering humans to do cool things, but in a safe way that we're not destroying ourselves in the process. So I'm glad to have you both on, and thrilled to see these events come together, and hopefully, like we said, we'll get to see you in person at one of them. In the meantime, we invite everybody to go to auto-sens.com and InCabin.com. Check out the European event in Barcelona, 8th through 10th in October, and connect with Rob and Sara and follow them for other stuff going on throughout the year. And of course, stay tuned to ITSP Magazine, and as we continue to chat about this and other areas of tech that impact how we live our lives and vice versa. So thank you both.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Marco, I just realized we're gonna have to change our vroom vroom that's not very electric vehicle friendly, that sound.
So what would that be?
I don't know.
That's okay. That's okay. It's not exclusively electric. No problem whatsoever.
Like ICs, yeah.
Vroom is fine.
Like vroom vrooms.
All right.
I mentioned the Flintstone at the beginning, so it could be actually human power, and that's okay too.
I can't make that funny cartoon sound with the feet.
Yeah, yabba dabba do.
Exactly. Yabba yabba do.
Well, it's fantastic having you both on. Thank you so much. Good luck with the conferences, and we will see you again soon.
Been a pleasure. Nice to meet you both. Thanks for inviting us. Yeah, look forward to talking again soon.
High Trust continues to champion programs that safeguard sensitive information and manage information risk for global organizations across industries and throughout the third-party supply chain, collaborating with public and private sector experts in privacy, information security, and risk management to identify emerging threats and help organizations ensure they take the most effective steps to avoid them. Learn more at hightrustalliance.net. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Sean and Marco's on-location event coverage conversations. Please take a moment to give the show a good rating and leave a comment. Remember to share this podcast with your friends, family, and colleagues. Come back for more conversations and follow Sean Martin and Marco Ciappelli as they continue their journey toward redefining cybersecurity and society.